Are the voices in your head ego or intuition? Today we figure out what is the difference between the ego and the intuition. How many times in your life have you had to make a decision? How many times have you been told to weigh the pros and cons, to follow your gut, or listen to your intuition? I bet you've heard that several times. It's a common statement because it really is the best advice. The problem is that it's easier said than done. And the reason is because we have two voices in our head. We have our ego voice, and we have an inner guidance voice called our intuition. Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Carrie Cox, and I help people use their personal power to build a connection between their mind, body, and spirit. In today's video, we are going to discuss how to tell the difference between that ego voice and that intuitive voice. And stick with me till the end of the video where we look at the questions we should be asking those inner voices. If this is your first time here, make sure you hit the subscribe button and smash that bell notification button so that you can be notified when I publish content in the future. So intuition isn't the only voice that talks to us. We have this other voice in our head. It's a much louder voice, and it's always screaming at us. That voice that we constantly hear in our mind, that's our ego voice. My ego voice used to be very noisy, and most people's are. Our ego is what ties us to the material world. It's our perception of ourself. The Upanishads talked about two selves. They talked about the lower self and the higher self. The lower self was the ego self. It was the non-permanent self. It was the self that contained personality and lower faculties. And then they talked about the higher self, which was the permanent self. It was our true, authentic soul. Since ego has a very loud voice, it becomes hard to hear that intuitive voice because it's so mild-mannered and quiet. It tends to get lost in the noise. I remember it taking a lot of practice and patience when learning how to tell the difference between the two. And even today, I may not always get it right, but it's about being aware and mindful and knowing how to ask the right questions and knowing how to tell the difference between the two so that you can get a feel for what sounds like the ego and what sounds like intuition. Now, ego gets a bad name. There's a lot of teachings out there that teach to completely let go of the ego, to kill the ego. The ego has an important job. Its job is to protect you. Its job protects you mentally and physically. And it's a powerful job because it helps us interpret this material world so that our soul can understand it. What I truly find amazing is how mind-body complex will use things and has these built-in protective mechanisms. They're defense mechanisms that serve to protect us and to keep that balance in homeostasis in our body. When we hurt ourselves physically and we get a physical injury, the muscles, they splint and they guard. They start to protect the injury. So we have these mechanisms in the body physically that are there to protect us. Ego is the same thing, but on a mental emotional scale. It's there to help protect us. Our ego is largely influenced by the world around us, by our experiences, our past, our traumas, our hurts and our fears. And as the ego worries, it starts to get louder and louder. We will get more and more distracted, and we begin to hear less and less of our intuition. We start listening to ego and living our life by what ego tells us and how ego tells us to live. Some teachings out there teach us that we have to get rid of it, but what if we don't have to get rid of it? We just need to quiet it. What if we just need to let go of our identity and surrender to it so that in that very moment, we can become one. We can let go of the thoughts and the programming that has been placed on us where we can't use our own intuition and we can't think for ourselves because we've been conditioned to believe certain aspects or experiences or beliefs or values. Those are conditions. And the reason we don't want to let go of our ego altogether, we don't want to get rid of it forever, is because we need it to have this physical existence. You're going to continue to need that ego to experience reality, but we can learn to quiet that voice so we can hear that other voice in our head, the one you want to listen to, that quieter voice. Ego can be used to help you get closer to your true self. And that's because ego gets loud. And when ego gets loud, it gives us opportunity. It opens up the opportunity for you to be able to see where maybe your beliefs and your values and your thoughts differ from that of the thoughts and the beliefs and the actions of your goals. The idea here that I really want to come across today is that if we can learn to use both of them, then we can create the life that we want, the life that we desire. So the first step is to learn to quiet the mind. And when you learn how to figure out the difference between and you master it, you're going to gain confidence and peace of mind. That only happens when you truly allow your intuition to flow in and guide your choices and actions. So let's look at the difference between ego and intuition. Intuition is a non-linear process. This means that intuition doesn't reason, it doesn't use logic, doesn't weigh the pros and cons of a situation. It just simply knows. Ego, on the other hand, well, that's going to bring you through a process of reasoning, analysis, and deduction, and then it's going to draw conclusions. Intuition doesn't follow steps, it just knows. It gives you clear guidance without muddying up an answer. Your ego is the logical mind, and your intuition is the spiritual mind. Intuition gathers information from a non-empirical process. This means it doesn't perceive the information through the senses. Instead, it's given to you in information that appears more like symbols or signs or synchronicities. Ego processes in an empirical format. It uses sensory information through your five senses, like taste, touch, hearing, smell. Ego gathers information that it's used in the past from past experiences, truths of reality, and other existing factors. It uses all that information and decides what's the best course of action. If you can learn to use your intuition guidance in an empirical process, like we use our ego, then you can use your reasoning mind with it. Intuition interprets information. The symbolic and intuitive impressions must be interpreted so that they can be useful. When we get an answer from our intuitive self, the answer comes very quick and it never changes. Ego, however, takes time. Not only does ego speak, but it also floods your mind with lots of choices. It creates lots of possible outcomes. And that's why the saying, "go with your first instinct," is so true. Intuition never questions or doubts. It's just guidance that will lead you to where you need to go. When we have questions, intuition is always there to give us answers. Intuition views the universe and all of its possibilities until a question is asked. When you're using your intuition, you're tapping into this huge array of information. But if you don't ask a question, intuition doesn't know what to look for. Intuition doesn't know what to pull first. Every human has millions of questions a day. So intuition has to be directed as to which of those questions you want answered. Ego loves to fill your head full of what ifs. It also likes to talk first and loud. So it's key to become aware. Awareness is how you're going to learn to decipher between the two. And always remember that intuition is going to wait for you to ask a question. Let's look at the signs that our ego is talking. I want you guys to understand that we don't all experience intuition in the same way. There's no magic list to memorize and practice and master. The only way you're going to master it is to practice using it and to practice quieting the mind so that you can hear that quieter voice. You have to cultivate self-trust in listening to that first answer in your question. Clear your mind from all the chatter and create an intention. This is going to help you strengthen that line of communication between your lower self and your higher self, or your inner self and your outer self. When you have your first moment of clarity, remember what that felt like. When you can recognize the feeling, it helps strengthen the channel of communication that fosters your inner wisdom. While remembering that ego is never going to go away, recognizing the feeling of ego takes doubt away. If you only take one thing away from this video, this is what I want you to take away. Your ego comes from fear and lack, while your intuition comes from a place of love and knowing, and that is always going to guide you in the right direction. If you can listen to what questions ego puts in a situation, then you can look within yourself and ask, is that true? Is that what I really want? Is that question going to serve my higher self? So let's look at some questions that we could ask and see the difference between the question posed for ego and for intuition. Okay, so a question from your ego might look like, what if I fail? And a question from our intuition would be, what if I succeed? Can you feel the difference between the two? What if I fail? What if I succeed? Another question by ego might be, why is this happening to me? And intuition will say, what is the best that can happen to me? Ego may ask, why is everything so expensive? Well, intuition says, how can I find a solution? Ego questions, can you guarantee those results? And intuition says, can I change the story I am telling myself? Just in those few questions, you can see the difference between the two, with the ego questions being more about self-doubt, fear, or anger. So if we just simply take a moment and rephrase the question, we will get a different answer. It will be a quieter answer, but it will help us to return to our true self. I want to leave you with an example of a quick story from the Cherokee. It is called There is a Battle of Two Wolves Inside Us All. An old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside of me, he said to the boy. It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He is angry, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego, he continued. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside of you, and inside every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, which wolf will win? The old Cherokee simply replied, the one that you feed. Remember that our minds are the most powerful weapon we have. We can choose to create, or we can choose to destroy. Seek greater awareness by looking at the world from a distance and within. Resist the temptation to limit your outlook. Question things from a calm, neutral perspective of love. This will assure that you remove fear, guilt, anger, or judgment. Your higher self looks at conflict and drama and chaos, and it sees hidden meanings and purposes behind it. This will give you a chance to grow and to find inner peace. And always remember, the first step is awareness. So practice becoming aware of the voice you are listening to. Thank you for joining me in today's video. If you enjoyed today's content, please share with all of your friends and hit that like button. Namaste.